It was never the large expenses that held you back. Most people spend their entire financial lives managing the obvious, the bills, the debt, the visible decisions, while something far smaller and far more consistent quietly prevents wealth from ever forming. Solomon understood this, and what he recorded in Proverbs was not financial advice. It was a structural law, one that disciplined households applied in silence for generations, and that most earning adults today have never once been taught. Small money is not noise beneath the signal. Small money is where financial destiny is actually decided. The system that controls where your money goes before your mind can negotiate with it has a name, a sequence, and a discipline, and it is older than any strategy the modern world is currently selling you. If this challenges you, stay until the end. It was never the large expenses that held you back. Read that again. Sit with it. Not the rent, not the car payment, not the single large purchase you regret. Those were visible. Those were felt. You adjusted for those. What held you back was quieter than that. What held you back had no sound, no single moment of arrival. It moved through your financial life the way water moves through a cracked foundation, slowly, silently, and without announcement. Until one day, you look around and wonder why nothing has accumulated, why the numbers never seem to stack, why the months keep ending in the same place they began. This is not a story about income. This is a story about structure. And the difference between those two words is the difference between a life of financial motion and a life of financial progress. Most people will never understand that distinction. Not because they are unintelligent, not because they lack ambition, but because they were never taught to see money as a system that must be designed only as a resource to be earned and spent. The entire modern financial conversation revolves around earning more, spending wisely, and avoiding obvious mistakes. What it never addresses is the invisible architecture beneath all of it. The structure that determines where money goes before you ever decide to spend it. That structure is what we are going to examine today. Consider the salaried worker. He is not a failure. He is not reckless. He earns consistently, manages his obligations, and participates in the modern financial system the way he was taught to. He works. Money arrives. Money leaves. The cycle repeats. At the end of each month, the balance is roughly what it was at the beginning. Sometimes slightly less. Occasionally, slightly more. But the trajectory, when measured honestly across years, is flat. He is active. He is moving. But he is not progressing. This is the modern wealth illusion. The sensation of financial participation without the reality of financial formation. The world around him reinforces this illusion beautifully. Transactions feel like decisions. Purchases feel like choices. The constant movement of money in and out of an account creates the psychological impression of control. But control is not movement. Control is direction. The salaried worker is not broken. He is simply operating without a structure that directs money before emotion can intercept it. Every incoming dollar enters an unorganized system, and an unorganized system distributes to wherever pressure is greatest. Pressure comes from needs, habits, social expectations, small desires, and the 10,000 quiet leaks that accumulate across a week without leaving a single memorable moment. That is where wealth disappears. Not in the large decisions, in the forgettable ones. Now we step back. Further back than most financial conversations are willing to go? In the ancient world, specifically in the traditions of wisdom recorded in the Hebrew Scriptures, wealth was not discussed in the language of motivation or hustle. It was discussed in the language of principle, of discipline, of structure that transcended individual circumstances. Proverbs 13:11 carries one of the most precise financial statements ever recorded. It does not speak of investment strategies or market timing. It says simply, wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. Read that with precision. Not wealth grows through effort. Not wealth comes to those who want it most. Wealth increases through a specific behavior gathering, consistently, in controlled increments. The opposite of this behavior is not poverty. It is speed, impatience, the belief that financial progress should be felt immediately, that accumulation should be visible, that if money is not moving loudly, it is not moving at all. Ancient households that operated under this principle did not display their accumulation. They contained it, they protected it, they built structures around it that prevented it from being redirected by convenience, by social pressure, or by the emotional pull of the moment. The wealthy merchant in ancient Jerusalem did not discuss his accumulation openly. He did not measure his progress against his neighbors. He measured it against his own structure, the system he had built to ensure that every unit of resource that passed through his household was assigned a purpose before it arrived. This is a fundamentally different relationship with money than the one most people in the modern world have inherited. Here is the assumption that needs to be broken. You were taught quietly, consistently, through observation and culture, that small money does not matter. That the minor transactions, the daily habits, the casual decisions made without deliberation are not worth examining. You were taught to focus on the big picture, to think about major financial moves, to treat the small flows as noise beneath the signal. This belief is not just inaccurate, it is structurally destructive. Consider two individuals. Same income, same city, same monthly obligations. At the end of 5 years, one has accumulated a position of quiet financial stability. The other has not. The difference between them is not income. The difference is not intelligence or discipline in any obvious, visible sense. The difference is what each of them did with the money that moved beneath the threshold of deliberate attention. One had a structure, the other had habits. Habits respond to emotion. Structure does not. When money enters a system governed by habits, it flows toward comfort, convenience, and whatever feels most urgent in that moment. Sometimes it pools in the right places. More often, it disperses without trace. What is ignored in small amounts becomes permanent in large outcomes. A flow that leaks 1% daily does not feel dangerous. Measured across a year, across 5 years, across a career, it becomes the sum total of what was never built. Small money is not irrelevant. Small money is the terrain on which financial destiny is decided. The large decisions are rare. The small ones are constant. And it is the constant, unexamined flow that determines the shape of a financial life. This is what the ancient systems understood. This is what the modern conversation consistently overlooks. What we are examining today has a name, a structure, a method. It is called the L.O.A.D method. This is not a modern financial product. It is not a budgeting app or an investment vehicle. It is a disciplined system of financial layering, a structured approach to allocating income that prevents leakage, enforces accumulation, and removes the emotional variable from financial decision-making. It was not invented in a boardroom. The principles that form its foundation are older than contemporary financial theory by several thousand years. The method operates through 4 layers: lock, order, accumulate, deny. Each layer serves a specific function. Each layer addresses a specific failure point in the way most people interact with income. Together, they form a complete architecture, a system in which money is never simply received and spent, but received, divided, and directed before the mind has an opportunity to negotiate with it. We will examine the first layer now, lock. Before money is used for anything, before obligations are paid, before living expenses are addressed, before a single discretionary decision is made, a fixed portion is removed from circulation entirely. Not saved in the traditional sense. Not placed in an account that remains accessible. Locked, restricted, made unavailable. This layer is not negotiable based on the month. It does not adjust when expenses are high. It does not pause when the situation feels tight. The discipline of the lock layer is precisely its non-negotiability. The moment a financial system begins making exceptions for itself, it has become a habit again. Habits bend, structure does not. In practical terms, this looks simple. Income arrives. Before the mind begins distributing it, before the bills are reviewed, before the grocery list is considered, before any social commitment is factored in, a fixed percentage is moved. Physically separated. The working capital you operate from is not your full income. It is your income minus the locked layer. This creates an immediate psychological adjustment. The number you see as available is smaller. And because the mind allocates from whatever appears available, the behavioral impact is real and measurable. You do not budget against a number you cannot access. You simply do not see it as part of your operating reality. The ancient merchant did not leave his accumulated gold in the same chamber as his trading inventory. The two were physically separate. One was for movement, one was for permanence. The discipline of that separation was not about distrust of oneself, it was about the understanding that the mind, given access, will always find a justification to use what is available. Remove the access. Remove the justification. What is locked cannot be lost. Here is the first identity shift. Disciplined families never mix money. Not because they are rigid or unsophisticated, because they understand that money which has been assigned a function cannot serve 2 functions simultaneously. When all available funds exist in a single, undivided space, when the emergency reserve and the grocery budget and the discretionary spending all occupy the same mental and physical location, every financial decision requires a negotiation between competing purposes. That negotiation is exhausting. and it is always vulnerable to the emotion present in the moment. The family that separates money by function removes that negotiation from the equation. The question is, no longer can I afford this right now? Because the answer depends entirely on which portion of available funds you are drawing from. The question becomes, does this belong in this layer? That is a structural question. It requires no emotional calculation. It either belongs or it does not. Mixing money destroys clarity. Clarity is the precondition for control. And control, not income, not opportunity, not ambition, is what creates wealth. There is a deeper layer to this method, one that operates beneath the surface of simple allocation, one that addresses not just how money is divided, but how wealth actually compounds in silence, away from the visibility that modern financial culture insists on performing. That layer has not been revealed yet. What you have received so far is the entry point, the recognition, the structure, the first, discipline. But the mechanism that separates those who accumulate quietly from those who remain perpetually active, without progress, is still ahead. The ancient systems built their wealth in stages, not because accumulation was slow by accident, but because each stage prepared the mind and the structure for the one that followed. You cannot build the fourth wall before the first three are stable. What grows, slowly, stays. Order. The second layer does not add complexity. It removes it. Once the locked portion has been separated, once that fixed percentage has been made unavailable to the operating mind, what remains is not free to be spent without direction. What remains enters the second layer of the method, and the second layer assigns every remaining dollar a rank before it is touched. Order means this: your living expenses do not compete with your discretionary spending. Your obligations do not negotiate with your preferences. Each category of expenditure is assigned a fixed percentage of the remaining income, and those percentages do not shift based on desire or convenience. They shift only when the structure itself is deliberately revised, not when the moment calls for flexibility. This is what the ancient household understood that the modern financial conversation has largely forgotten. A household without internal financial order is not a stable household. It is a reactive one. Every month becomes a new negotiation between the same competing demands. And, in a reactive system, the loudest demand wins, not the most important one. The merchant in the ancient marketplace did not arrive each morning and decide freshly how to allocate his inventory. The allocation was established. The structure was already in place before the day began. His discipline was not expressed in the decisions he made each morning. It was expressed in the system he had built so that fewer decisions were necessary. Order is not restriction. Order is clarity applied in advance. When income arrives and each portion already has an assigned destination, the cognitive load of money management drops to near zero. There is no deliberation. There is no negotiation. There is only the execution of a predetermined structure. And because the structure was built from principle rather than emotion, it holds when emotion resets. What is ordered becomes predictable. And predictability, in a financial system, is not a limitation. It is the foundation on which everything else is built. Accumulate. This is the third layer. And it is the one most people believe they are already practicing. They are not. Accumulation is not what remains after expenses. That is not accumulation, that is residue. Residue is what survives the month by chance. Accumulation is what is protected from the month by design. In the L.O.A.D structure, the accumulate layer is assigned before living expenses are addressed. Before the order layer distributes to obligations and daily life. A second fixed percentage is moved, not locked in the same way as the first layer, but directed towards silent, compounding growth. This is the layer that works while you do not, the layer that does not announce itself, the layer that never appears in a visible display of financial activity because it is never in motion, it is only ever growing. Ancient wealth was not built through spectacular accumulation, it was built through uninterrupted accumulation. The difference is significant. Spectacular accumulation requires exceptional circumstances, a windfall, an investment that outperforms, a season of unusual income. Uninterrupted accumulation requires only consistency and protection. It requires that the system never pauses for convenience, never makes exceptions for comfort, and never allows the accumulated layer to be reclassified as available funds. Proverbs 13:11 does not celebrate the person who found a way to earn dramatically more. It honors the one who gathered little by little. The emphasis is not on the size of what was gathered. It is on the consistency of the gathering, and on the discipline that prevented what was gathered from being redistributed. The accumulate layer is where financial silence lives. You do not speak about it. You do not measure it against others. You do not seek validation that it is growing correctly. It simply grows, in the background, undisturbed, compounding in the discipline of your structure. Wealth grows in what you refuse. But first, it must have somewhere undisturbed to grow. And now, the fourth layer, the one that is most misunderstood, most resisted, and most essential. Deny does not mean deprivation. It does not mean the rejection of all comfort or the performance of scarcity. Deny means the deliberate refusal of expenditure that falls outside the structure, even when the money is available, even when the purchase is affordable, even when no visible harm would come from it. This is where most financial systems collapse. Not in the moments of obvious excess. In the moments of invisible permission. The purchase that is affordable. The upgrade that is reasonable. The habit that costs very little individually but is never examined collectively. These are the decisions that feel like freedom but function as leakage. And leakage tolerated consistently dismantles accumulation quietly and completely. The discipline of deny is not about the transaction itself. It is about the identity behind the decision. A person who has internalized the L.O.A.D structure does not evaluate each purchase on its individual merit. They evaluate it on its structural merit. Does this expenditure belong within the order layer's designated allocation? If yes, it is permitted. If no, if it requires pulling from a layer that was assigned a different purpose, it is denied. Not with resentment, not with struggle. With the calm neutrality of someone who has already decided in advance what their structure allows. The ancient household understood denial not as sacrifice, but as selection. They were not refusing things because they could not have them. They were refusing things because those things did not belong in the structure they had chosen to build. The refusal was an expression of identity, not limitation. Wealth grows in what you refuse, not what you accept. That principle is not a motivational phrase. It is a structural fact. Every dollar that is refused entry into unnecessary expenditure is a dollar that remains within the architecture. And an architecture that loses nothing compounds everything. Consider what has happened to the relationship between money and emotion in a person who has fully integrated this structure. Before the L.O.A.D method, money was felt. It arrived and produced relief or anxiety. It left and produced guilt or freedom. Every transaction carried emotional weight. The account balance was not just a number, it was a daily referendum on personal adequacy. Spending brought temporary relief from the pressure of restraint. Saving brought temporary pride that lasted until the next temptation arrived. That is an exhausting way to live. And it is the way most people live, without ever identifying it as a problem, because everyone around them lives the same way. After the structure is in place, something fundamental shifts. Money stops being felt and starts being processed. The emotional variable is removed, not because the person has become cold or detached from life, but because the decisions have already been made. When income arrives, it is divided. The division is not a fresh decision. It is the execution of a structure. There is no negotiation with the self. No calculation of whether this month deserves an exception. The system runs, and the person operates within it. This is what control actually feels like. Not the feeling of gripping money tightly, afraid to release it. The feeling of designing a system in advance and then living inside it with ease. Impulse does not disappear, but it has nowhere productive to redirect the structure. It meets a boundary that was built before the impulse arrived. And without a decision to negotiate, the impulse passes. Control removes anxiety. Not because the financial picture changes overnight, but because the mind is no longer required to manage an unmanaged system in real time. There is a belief that deserves to be examined directly. Because it underlies the financial life of almost everyone who has been raised in the modern working world. The belief is this: more effort produces more financial progress. Work longer, earn more, find additional income, expand the hustle. If the numbers are not moving in the right direction, the answer must be more input on the earning side. This belief is not entirely false, but it is incomplete in a way that causes significant damage. Because more income entering an unstructured system does not build wealth, it accelerates leakage. It expands the available pool from which undirected spending draws. The person who earns more without changing their structure does not accumulate more. They simply operate at a higher volume of the same cycle. Earn more, spend more, arrive at the same relative position. Structure is not a supplement to income. Structure is the precondition for income to matter. The ancient world did not celebrate the person who worked the most hours in the marketplace. It honored the person whose household was ordered, whose allocation was disciplined, whose accumulation was protected, whose refusals were consistent. Effort was expected. Structure was respected. Less chaos, more control. That is not a reduction in ambition. That is an elevation of it. The goal is not to work less. The goal is to ensure that what is worked for is directed by a system designed to retain it rather than dispersed by a life designed only to generate it. Effort without structure multiplies nothing. Now the behavior. Every time income arrives, regardless of size, regardless of source, the first action is division. Before a single obligation is addressed, before a single purchase is considered, before the mind has had time to survey the available balance and begin assigning it informally, the L.O.A.D structure is applied. Lock first, accumulate second. Order the remainder into its designated categories. Then, and only then, live within what remains. This is not a monthly ritual. It is not a quarterly review. It is the immediate response to every income event. Because the moment money enters an unstructured space, the mind begins negotiating with it. The moment the negotiation begins, the outcome is uncertain. Remove the window between arrival and structure, and you remove the negotiation entirely. Consistency is not the reward for discipline. Consistency is the form that discipline takes. It does not feel significant in any single moment. No individual execution of this practice will feel like a turning point. The practice sustained across months becomes habit. Habit sustained across years becomes identity. And identity, not income, not market conditions, not opportunity, is what determines the long-term shape of a financial life. Repetition creates permanence. Do not wait for the month when the structure feels easier to maintain. Do not wait until income is higher, or obligations are lower, or circumstances are more favorable. The structure is built precisely to operate in unfavorable conditions. A system that only functions when conditions are comfortable is not a system. It is a preference. One final caution, delivered without drama. Impatience is the only force capable of dismantling a properly built structure from the inside, not external circumstances, not income volatility, not unexpected expenses. Those are pressures that a structured system is designed to absorb. Impatience is different. Impatience is internal. It is the quiet voice that observes the structure working slowly and concludes that slow is the same as broken. It is not. Wealth built through layered, disciplined allocation does not produce visible results in the first weeks or even the first months. It produces invisible results, the absence of leakage, the quiet growth of the accumulate layer, the gradual reduction of financial anxiety as the structure becomes automatic. The visible results come later. They come when the accumulate layer has grown undisturbed long enough to become significant. They come when the identity has shifted far enough from reactive to structured that money no longer produces emotional turbulence at all. The ancient principle does not promise speed. It promises permanence. What grows slowly, stays. What arrives suddenly, leaves the same way. If you find yourself watching the structure and feeling that it is not moving quickly enough, understand that this feeling is the trap. The impatient person dismantles a working structure before it has had time to compound. They return to the unstructured cycle, chase a faster method, and begin again. The cycle repeats. The position never improves. Not because the structure was wrong, but because it was abandoned before time could honor it. Time rewards structure, not effort. Patience is not passive. Patience is the active maintenance of a system while pressure mounts to abandon it. Gold remains where it is respected. That is not a metaphor. It is an observation recorded across centuries of financial behavior, distilled into a truth simple enough to carry in a single sentence. Money does not stay in environments of chaos, impulse, or indiscipline. It passes through them. It moves from the unstructured hand to the structured one, not because of fairness or fortune, but because of the invisible architecture that either holds value or releases it. The L.O.A.D method is that architecture. Lock what cannot be touched. Order what remains. Accumulate in silence. Deny what does not belong. Apply it immediately and consistently. Maintain it without exception. Allow time to do what structure alone cannot compound what discipline has protected. This is not a new system. It is a very old one, dressed in the language of the modern world so that it can be recognized, applied, and lived. But its roots are ancient. Its authority is not borrowed from the marketplace or the boardroom. It is drawn from the same source that Proverbs drew from the observation that human behavior around money follows consistent patterns, and that those patterns can be shaped by deliberate structure into outcomes that feel, eventually, like quiet inevitability. You were never going to build wealth through volume alone. You were always going to need a structure that money could not escape from. Now you have one. The L.O.A.D method. Lock, order, accumulate, deny. Apply it before you spend another dollar. Proverbs 30:11. Wealth gained hastily will dwindle. but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. If this changed how you think, not just what you know, share it with someone who is earning but not yet building.